Today's lesson is Module 2, Lesson 11, and the title of our lesson is Fraction, Multiplication, and the products of decimals. If you remember a few lessons ago, I told you that word product means to multiply. So today we're going to be talking about the connections between multiplying fractions and multiplying decimals. So today we're going to make connections between multiplying fractions, specifically mixed numbers. And decimals. So we're just going to work through an example and I'm going to break it down for you so you can see that connection. So here's our example. If I have 3 17/100 times 4 3/10, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change to a mixed number. And you don't have to write out these steps in your work, but for your notes, go ahead and do that so that you understand what you're doing. So because this is a whole number, then I write it as a whole number. And then this is 17/100, so I put 17 over 100. And some of you might be saying to yourself, how do you know that it's 17/100? Well, however many digits are behind a decimal, we're going to make sure that there's that many zeros in our denominator. So because there's two numbers behind the decimal point, I'm going to make it 100. Then I'll put in my multiplication symbol. This 4 is a whole number, and then we have 3/10. So I put that over 10. And you can see that the same way that I read the number as a decimal, I can still write it that same way as a fraction. The next thing I am going to need to do when I multiply mixed numbers, remember first I have to change it to an improper fraction. So the first thing I need to do is multiply 100 times 3, which gives me 300. And then I'm going to add that to the 17. So that gives me 317 over 100. I keep my same multiplication operation. Then I'm going to do 10 times 4, which gives me 40. And I'm going to add that to the 3, which gives me 43. And then again, I keep my denominator. So now all I need to do is multiply these two things. I can get out a calculator or I can work it out. With my calculator, I type in 317 times 43. That gives me 13,631. And for those of you who want to see that just multiplied out, 3 times 7 is 21. Regroup my 2. 3 times 1 is 3, plus 2 more is 5. 3 times 3 is 9. Put in my placeholder. 4 times 7 is 28. Regroup my 2. I'm done with that one. 4 times 1 is 4, plus 2 more is 6. And 4 times 3 is 12. I add all of this together. 1 plus 0 is 1. 5 plus 8 is 13. Regroup my 1. 1 plus 9 is 10. Plus 6 more is 16. Regroup my 1. 1 plus 2 is 3. And 1 plus nothing is 1. So again, you can see that I got the same answer as I did when I used my calculator. Then I'm going to do 100 times 10, which gives me 1,000. So now there are two different ways I can put my decimal in to convert this back to a decimal, because now I've got to change this answer back to a decimal. So we're going to say change back to a decimal. And if you remember up here when we were talking about putting numbers, putting the digit over the correct number in the denominator, since there are 3 zeros in my denominator, I know that 3 digits have to be behind my decimal. So then my answer becomes 13 and 631 thousandths. There's another way that I know that is the correct way. If I go back to my original problem, I see that there's 1, 2, 3 decimals behind the decimal point. So I know that there has to be 1, 2, 3 decimals behind the decimal point. Now, if we wanted to divide this out, because remember that that symbol also means to divide, I can also just divide that out. So I would have 13,631 divided by 1,000. How many thousands are in 13,000? 13. I subtract, I get 631. I add in my decimal and a 0. Bring down my 0. How many thousands are in 6,000? 6. Subtract. Add in another 0. How many thousands are in 3,000? There are 3. Subtract. Add in my last 0. How many thousands are in 1,000? 1. So you can see that my answer still matches there. Or I can just do my trusted algorithm of multiplying decimals. If you remember, in our previous lesson, in lesson 10, we talked about the rules of multiplying decimals. And the first rule is ignore decimal. Ignore the decimal. Step 2 is just to multiply. So now I'm just going to multiply. So 3 times 7 is 21. Regroup my 2. 3 times 1 is 3, plus 2 more is 5. 3 times 3 is 9. Put in my placeholder. 4 times 7 is 28. Regroup my 2. 4 times 1 is 4, plus 2 more is 6. 4 times 3 is 12. I add all of this together. And then my step 3 is to count the digits behind the decimal. So I'm going to count how many digits are behind the decimal. 1, 2, 3. And then my last step is to put the decimal in that same number of places. Put the decimal in the same number of places. So because I had 3, I go 1, 2, 3. So then I put my decimal right here. And again, I get the same answer. So now if you'll go ahead and take out your book and open it up to lesson 11 in module 2, we are going to take a look at some things and actually change a few things around. We're going to cross out these instructions here because we're going to do things a little bit differently. So we're going to divide our paper into 3 sections. And the first thing I want us to do is to estimate. And we're going to estimate the product of the problem, 34 and 6200ths times 12 and 8/10. So if I'm going to estimate 34.62 is closer to 35 and 12.8 is close to 13. So I'm going to now multiply this out. 5 times 3 is 15. Regroup my 1. 3 times 3 is 9 plus 1 more is 10. Put in my placeholder. 1 times 5 is 5. 1 times 3 is 3. Add this together. 5 plus 0 is 5. 0 plus 5 is 5. 1 plus 3 is 4. So that's my estimation. So my answer should be someplace pretty close to this. And because I rounded up both of these numbers to the nearest whole number, I rounded up, this number is likely to be bigger than the exact answer. The next thing I'm going to do is now write these as fractions. So it's 34 and 6200ths times 12 and 8/10. So then remember my next step is to now turn these into improper fractions. And I'm just going to go ahead and use my calculator just to save some time. So I do 100 times 34. So remember I multiply here. So that gives me 3,400 and I'm going to add that 62. So I put plus 62 equals 3,462 over 100. Keep my multiplication. Now I'm going to turn this one. So remember, I'm going to multiply first. So 10 times 12 equals 120. And then I'm going to add in my 8 equals 128 over 10. So now I'm going to multiply straight across. So I'm going to do 3,462 times 128, and that gives me 443,136. 443,136, and I put that over 100 times 10, which gives me 1,000. Now remember, there's a couple ways that I can know where to put my decimal. In my original problem, there were 3 numbers behind the decimal point. So when I write my answer, I count my 3, and I'm always counting from right to left. I put in my decimal. So my answer is 443 and 136 thousandths. Remember, I can always count how many zeros are also in my problem, and I would know that, again, I'd have that same number behind. Next, I can just do my multiplication. Remember, my step 1 is to ignore my decimal. So 8 times 2 is 16. Regroup my 1. 8 times 6 is 48, plus 1 more is 49. Regroup my 4. 8 times 4 is 32, plus 4 more is 36. Regroup my 3. 8 times 3 is 24, plus 3 more is 27. Now I'm finished with these numbers. Put in my placeholder because now I'm going to my tens place. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 6 is 12. Regroup my 1. 2 times 4 is 8, plus 1 more is 9. And 2 times 3 is 6. Again, put in my 2 placeholders because now I'm going to my hundreds place. 1 times 2 is 2. 1 times 6 is 6. 1 times 4 is 4. 1 times 3 is 3. Now I'm going to add this together. 6 plus 0 is 6. 9 plus 4 is 13. Regroup my 1. 1 plus 6 is 7. Plus 2 more is 9. Plus 2 more is 11. Regroup my 1. 1 plus 7 is 8. Plus 9 more is 17. Plus 6 more is 23. Regroup my 2. 2 plus 2 is 4. Plus 6 more is 10. Plus 4 more is 14. Regroup my 1. 1 plus 3 is 4. Count up how many numbers are behind my decimal. And I do the same thing here. So you can see that these two numbers are the exact same, and they're pretty close to the 455, and we talked about how it may be a little bit more because we did round those numbers up. We'll do the same thing for the next problem. Our first one is going to be an estimate. Then we're going to do fractions. And then we'll do decimals. So in this problem, it says Xavier earns $11.50 per hour working at a nearby grocery store. Last week, he worked 13.5 hours. How much money did Xavier earn last week? And then it says, remember to round to the nearest penny. So that means hundreds place. My goodness, if I could spell. Hundreds with that THS. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is estimate. So 11.5 is close to 12, and 13.5 is close to 14. So 4 times 2 is 8, 1 times 4 is 4. Put in my placeholder because now I'm ready to multiply my tens place. 1 times 2 is 2, 1 times 1 is 1. Add that together, 8, 6, 1. So my answer should be something close to 168. But again, because we rounded these two numbers up, it may be a little bit more. So now we're going to write these numbers as fractions. So it's 11.5 or 50 over 100 times 13.5, or I would say 50 over 100. Okay, so now we're going to change these into improper fractions. So 100 times 11 equals 1100. Then we're going to add in our 50. Gives us 1,150 over 100. Keep my multiplication symbol. Next, I'm going to multiply 100 times 13. Gives me 1,300. I'm going to add that to the 50. 1,350 over 100. then I'm going to multiply straight across. So 1,150 times 1,350 equals 1552500 over 100 times 100 equals 10,000. Now, if you remember right, we put the same number, 2, 3, 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So right here is where my decimal is going to go. So when I rewrite this, I write 155.2500. And this says round to the nearest hundredths place. So I can actually get rid of this. So my money is $155.25. Oh, sorry, I probably should have raised that up for you to see. So now I can also just do my regular multiplication. Five times 0 is 0. 5 times 5 is 25. Regroup my 2. 5 times 1 is 5, plus 2 more is 7. 5 times 1 is 5. Put in my placeholder because I'm going to be multiplying by my tens place. 3 times 0 is 0. 3 times 5 is 15. Regroup my 1. 3 times 1 is 3, plus 1 more is 4. And 1 times 3 is 3. Put in my 2 placeholders because I'm now going to be multiplying by my hundreds place. 1 times 0 is 0. 1 times 5 is 5. 1 times 1 is 1. And 1 times 1 is 1. Now I'm going to add all of this together. All these zeros equal 0. 5 plus 0 plus 0 is 5. 7 plus 5 plus 0 is 12. Regroup my 1. 1 plus 5 is 6. Plus 4 more is 10. Plus 5 more is 15. Regroup my 1. 1 plus 3 is 4. Plus 1 more is 5. And 1 plus nothing is 1. There are 3 numbers behind the decimal in my algorithm or in my problem. So I'm going to make sure there are 3 numbers behind the decimal there. So when I write this as money, I get the same answer. So I would answer Xavier earned $155.25 last week. So that I'm actually writing out a statement that goes with my answer. Now you are going to go on, we're going to skip the discussion notes because I've actually stepped through all of those notes with you. And you are going to do numbers 1 and 2, 3 and 4, and then come see me, I'll check it, and then I will give you your assignment from there. If you have any questions, please let me know.